Morning, everybody. Welcome to the Primordial Forest session. Primordial Forest is a raw black. By the end of this session, you're going to have notes to compare with Cascade, which was the first raw black we did in this series, and Newman, which was that special 17 to 18-year-old raw black that we had last week. And then today, Primordial Forest. Before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about shop news, maybe talk a little bit about people who wandered into the shop. That could be interesting. So let's first start out with shop news. This week, Monday and Tuesday, we had film crews in here, actors on Tuesday, doing a short clip, comedic clip. I don't know what this is going to be used for at the end of the day, but it was just an interesting process. The shop looked completely different. We took a bunch of tables and put them outside. There was a dream sequence in here where the lighting was all changed. It was fun, learning experience. Oh, and I think they may call this clip, if it becomes famous, one of the tea names in the shop. So I'll let you know, keep you informed as we get more information. So that takes care of, Monday, Tuesday. Let's see. Let's go back to Sunday, because Sunday was an interesting day. So, in this world, there are lots of tea experts. And we love communicating with tea experts. So a gentleman came in on Sunday and got me isolated for a brief second and said, might you be interested in purchasing red cliff tea? Now, that has a lot of things in that question, doesn't it? Cliff tea? I mean, that's kind of a magnetic word. When you hear the word cliff tea, you think your mind instantly goes to dreamscape, ebullient. And so all of a sudden you're happy and you're excited. Oh, cliff tea. Do you have something interesting? Oh, but wait a minute. He used an adjective. Red cliff tea. So at first I was confused. And here's what went through my mind. As a person in the tea industry, I thought, okay, this person has conflated red tea, which is oxidized, heavily oxidized, with cliff tea, which is semi-oxidized. And the reason that it's conflated is because it must be coming from the Wuyi Mountains. Because remember, as you guys are all experts, there's red tea that comes from the Wuyi Mountains, Smoky Pine being one of the most famous of those. And then there's cliff teas. Radiance comes from the Wuyi Mountains. Divine Plum, a beautiful red tea, comes from the Wuyi Mountains. So that's why at first I thought, okay, just a little confusion on that. And after all, we can all have a little confusion from time to time, right? So then, as a checkpoint, I asked the following question. I said, you mean Northern Fujian Province Wuyi Mountain tea, is that correct? And you're talking about maybe a red or a cliff tea from that area? Oh, no. I'm not talking about that place. I'm talking about northern Thailand. Okay, so right away we have trouble. When you use the term cliff tea, you have to be really, really careful, especially in Chinese. And by the way, this person spoke Chinese, claimed to have 4 years of experience in the tea industry. And therefore, and I double checked with him because I say Yan Cha, and he said, yeah, Yan Cha. And then he drops the northern Thailand. And so I knew, even before he knew, what was wrong with this picture. In fact, I knew from a historic perspective of what was wrong with this picture. And I'll explain that in a minute, because this actually comes into an area of stuff that I know and historical stuff that I know. So why would anybody be doing an oolong tea in northern Thailand? And this goes all the way back to 1949. And in 1949, when the communists took over China, there was an army, a huge segment of the KMT army that fought and fought its way out of China on the border of Thailand into Thailand. And through a combination of events, the Thai government ended up offering them a place of refuge. And so you have this small area with all these Chinese people had various skills, and obviously some subset of them know tea and produce tea from tea plants that either they planted or were pre-existing in the border area. So when you use the word cliff tea, yan cha, in the tea industry, would anybody in the whole wide world use that to describe a tea that was outside of Wuyi Mountains? The answer is, of course not, because that term is associated with the Wuyi Mountains, just like the term high mountain oolong tea is associated with Taiwan. It's almost like an unwritten rule. You wouldn't say high mountain Wuyi oolong tea. You just wouldn't say that, because nobody would be clear what you were referring to. High mountain Wuyi tea. You mean cliff tea? Just as the other way around. You wouldn't say Taiwanese cliff tea. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't exist linguistically that way. Now, shortly thereafter, Xiaobei, the tea master, she has radar and antenna and just the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th sense of when things are going on. And immediately grabbed this guy and sat down with him, and they talked in Chinese. And the whole story about this guy is he was really trying to sell tea. And really his breadth of experience was 1 year in the tea industry. He really didn't have experience in the tea industry. He's trying to represent a subset of farmers. Nothing wrong with that. The thing that's wrong is when you linguistically mess up in how you're calling a tea. It's dishonest to say cliff tea and not have further explanation. Oh, this is cliff tea from northern Thailand, or I have tea from northern Thailand that they call cliff tea. All of those things could have been said, and then we'd have had a different sort of feeling. We'd have had a different sort of discussion. If you're in the tea business and you use that term, you better know, or you better indicate knowledge of what that term refers to. You can't use that term carelessly. And then doubly, you can't use that term and try and sell me stuff. And actually, he had, even before he tried that, used a term of working with high mountain tea, which of course I immediately thought was Taiwan. And he indicated it was Taiwan, but I think he was referring really to this tea that he had out of northern Thailand. So these are the examples of where things can go wrong. And when you're talking with people, especially all of you, you know right away, oh, there's a problem with this terminology. I better ask a few more questions. And as you ask the questions, then you get more of a sense of what's really being referred to. So let me give you another example of how this is handled correctly. So in Yunnan in 2019, we took a group up to a beautiful lake, 7,500 feet above sea level, Dudran Lake, that's translated as Ailao Lake. This was one of the first projects that the Taiwanese investors, private investors, invested in China after 1980. And what their attempt was, or what their project was to buy land in that area next to this beautiful lake, and then plant tea bushes, cultivate the tea bushes, do the processing, and export the product of that back to Taiwan and call it high mountain tea, because it's 7,500 feet above sea level. It is high mountain tea. And in fact, they advertise it as the world's highest elevation grown oolong tea, truly high mountain tea. And that's how they advertise it. They advertise it that way in Taiwan. They don't sell any of it in China. And so this is a correct way to take a methodology of doing tea and not lose context. They used correct context, high mountain tea, and they identified exactly where it was from up front. And they said the home market, in fact, the entire market for this tea was Taiwan, high mountain tea. So that's correct. No confusion. You show me that stuff. Wow, these guys did a good job. So in the tea industry, when you're in it, you're careful. And you do stuff like that, which means you're not trying to deceive people. It feels like deception, the way that things were presented on Sunday. I'm sure that the person in their heart was not a deceiving person. I'm sure that they meant to make a sale and be successful that way. But they didn't really mean to be deceptive. And it certainly would have been a mistake to come in here and try and be deceptive. So that's some of what happened this week. These are kind of highlights. As you know, I go through every week and pick out some highlights, and that's one of the highlights. So let's leave deception, lack of knowledge, and let's go to Yunnan. I love Yunnan. Yunnan's so much more pleasant a place to visit rather than deceptionally. Yunnan, oh, and by the way, for those of you who just got up, I sent two maps to you this morning. One is very confusing and probably hard to understand why I sent it. So it's all green and it's got red characters in it. And so it's really hard to note what I'm trying to point out. But really what I'm trying to point out is Ailao Mountain, which is the right side of the red characters. And then there's a valley in between, and you have Ailao Mountain. And from one mountain, you can look across the valley and see the other mountain range. Why is this important? We're going to be in Ailao today, but Wuliang Mountain is a place that over time you're going to hear more and more about. Hugely, hugely isolated. Bijou and I have been there. Hard to find anything. The roads are as bad as you can imagine. Well, they're not that bad, but they're bad. Takes forever to get anywhere. But once you get somewhere that's related to tea and tea trees and tea farmers, it's really interesting. And so I wanted to point out how close they are because I think over time we may end up bringing back tea from Wuliang Mountain. And so what I'm trying to show you is ancient tree is actually spread out over a large area in Yunnan Province. So in the Ailao area alone, there's about 20,000 acres of ancient tea trees. And they're not all in one place. The Ailao Mountains is 10,000 square kilometers. It's an enormous mountain range, but spread out over that mountain range in a bunch of different places, generally between 1,500 feet and 1,800 feet above sea level. In that narrow range, there's ancient trees. Are all these ancient trees planted by squirrels and other animals? Answer is apparently not. So they have proven that they found this one tree and they found records to it that's at least 1,000 years old that was transplanted from one place to another place. Now, you would argue, and you'd be right to argue this, well, transplanted means that it was already growing. So maybe the squirrels did plant it. The issue is that the documentation seems to indicate that peoples, and this would be indigenous peoples who lived in one place, planted it and then moved it. So I don't know the precise answer, but that certainly is kind of what goes through my mind as I think about it. Let's step back and take a greater picture of the Ailao Mountains. The Ailao Mountains is famous. In other words, if you look at the most famous things occurring in Yunnan related to ancient tea trees, and you take the top 10, Ailao would have at least 2 of those. The first one is they found a fossil there going back to 35.4 million years ago, tea tree. Therefore, they know at least that far back, tea trees existed. So that's kind of in the Hall of Fame, one of the top 10. Number 2 of this top 10 would be what they call the king tea tree. Now, I have trouble with these appellations, and I'll tell you why. Because we've been to other places where we've seen king trees. I admit that this is the tallest of the ancient tea trees that I've ever seen. It's about 80 feet tall. The base of it, in terms of width, is about 8 feet. So, yes, this is the tallest I've seen. Have I seen anything that has a wider width? And the answer is yes. I've seen something that has about a 13 or 14 foot width. That's enormous. And that particular king tree, which is not in the Ailao Mountains, claims to be 3,500 years old, even though it's relatively shorter, maybe 40 feet. It's kind of a midget compared to this tree. But I don't know. At any rate, what I do know is both are old, very old. And both represent the fact that tea trees have a long history, a very long history. And the Ailao Mountains in many places have these so-called gardens. And these are historic, written about in the Tang Dynasty, written about in dynasties after that. Oh yeah, I went to this place, ... And they produce pu tea there. Now the pu tea, it's PU by the way, is indicative really of a relationship to Bulong Mountain, as far as I can tell. So they summarize it or take a shortcut and call it Puti or Puti. And meaning it's from an area that's close to Bulong Mountain. Not that it's poor fermented tea, but simply it's tea from ancient tea trees. So those have been noted for a long time. So it isn't like people just woke up in the 1930s and saw these ancient trees and said, oh, wow, this is unique. No, there's been a record, but there hasn't been much interest until the last 100 years. Last 100 years, interest blew up all over the place. So Peter and I were talking yesterday, came in the shop, and I want to clear up something that I said last week, because I think I may have left some confusion. Because the question last week came up from an energetics perspective. Might I be expected to get a higher feeling of energetics from monoclonal trees versus ancient trees? Here's the answer. Monoclonal trees, it's just like a child that's been birthed. Naked, noisy, grab your attention. So the monoclonal is forward. It's always forward. Is forward more powerful? Is forward better than not forward? Well, let's think of it. Last week you had Newman. Newman had tremendous energetics, but they weren't forward. They were complicated. You had to wait till you were halfway down the cup. And then it's like, oh my God, this has power. This has real power. I feel it. Even though it was a raw black, we talked about the warming sensation. That's ancient tree. Ancient tree, just because it's ancient. Let's think about it this way. George Burns lived a long time. And in his 90s, when you talk to him, he didn't have Biden moments. Why did I go there? Sorry, I went there. George Burns was vibrant all the way to the end. And my meaning is, age isn't the determinant of energetics. The energetics exist in the plant, and the plant either expresses it fully, or if it's diseased, it doesn't express it. But if it's not diseased, the energetics exist, and they exist at a high level, even as the plant becomes ancient. Because as it becomes ancient, remember this, it's all connected in a vast forest where everybody, all the organisms that are connected are talking to each other, are aiding each other at the root level. Yes.
What does time on the shelf do to energetics?
Okay. What does time on the shelf do to energetics? This is a great question. So it depends. This isn't a straightforward answer to what is apparently a straightforward question. If the plant has aging to do, the energetics will retain, if it's stored right, up to a certain period. So for example, Newman, which has the 18-year-old, 17 or 18-year-old years that it's existed, we expect that to have full energetics for at least the next 8 years. At least we store it properly. If you ask me at 50 years old, what are the energetics? That's a different question. We've had 50-year-old tea, and the energetics are different. They're not on the surface. They are very subtle. But if the original plant had enormous energetics, and it's stored properly, somehow that retains. Newman it retains with the white teas. So enemy's demise, which is really 14 years old. That still has good energetics, really good energetics. On the other hand, we tasted something that was 30 plus years old that was a cliff tea. Did that have energetics? No, that had lost everything. It had lost proper flavor. It just didn't have much of energetics. So I know that this is going to be an unsatisfactory answer in one regard, because you're used to me saying, okay, if it's this type of tea, you got 12 years. Or if it's that type of tea, you have 18 years, or this type of tea, 3 years. Can't do that. Can't do that. Our knowledge about this is experiential. It's not based on Chinese science or any science, which has informed us in a way where I can be Western science precise. And that's why I apologize, because I know you're looking for Western precision, and ordinarily I want to give you Western precision. Instead, I give you anecdotal precision, precision based upon what we've seen in this show.
Is there a norm for the energetics for something like a raw black? Because there's some norms that you pointed out based on the ancient nature of leaf. There are norms in terms of energetic response when it comes to, let's say, red tea having warming qualities or white tea having cooling qualities. Are there similar norms for a raw black?
Great question. I want to make sure we're not confusing terms here, because then the question is, are there norms for raw blacks? And I heard two things in terms of energetics and in terms of what the specific energetics might be. So warming or cooling. So let's talk specifics first, and then we'll talk about energetics second. So specifics, if it's monoclonal, normally a raw black will make you feel very much like you've drunk a green tea. So it's normally cooling. And that's especially if it's younger, normally cooling. And as we found out last week, if it is aging and aged a lot, all of a sudden those energetics don't come across as cooling. They come across as warming, but that has to do with the inherent age of the tea leaves themselves. So those were picked from an ancient tree. The monoclonal, you wouldn't expect to get a warmth, even if it were 15, 16, 17 years old. You would expect to get subdued, but you wouldn't expect a warmth. The ancient tree is what brought the warmth from our understanding. So that's why you have to be careful, because we have otherworldly here. Otherworldly is from ancient tree. It's white. It's probably 6 or 7 or 8 years old. But from the start, because of the ancient tree nature of it, you get this surprising warmth. It should not be warm. It's a white tea. It should be cooling. This one is not cooling. It's got, and our conclusion is it has to do with age of tree. And so this turns out to be one of those classifications that we don't see formally in Chinese medicine, but I bet if we went back and asked a practitioner, they would make this same distinction that we're making now, because it is so obvious once you start drinking this. It's not even, well, maybe 50% are this way and 50, no. For the ancient stuff, it just wanders off into that warming realm. Great question, though. Great question. Let's see. Speaking of great questions, oh, the next great question is, when is Bijou going to make an appearance in front of us and brew Primordial Forest? That's a great question. And so, without further ado, no further stories, explanations, or energy transferences. Let me bring up the numinous tea master, Bijou.
早上好 ，Good morning。早上好 ，Good morning, everyone. We do rub like So this I prefer. Yeah, this rub like tea. 5 gram, 3 minutes.
5 grams, 3 minutes.
Minutes,
Yes.
okay.
Primordial Forest, 170 degrees. This is from the Ailao Mountains. And by the way, while she's drawing the water, I better not do this because I might get off into a long story. In a minute, I'll explain the other map that I see. So as usual, warming up the cups, you can use any temperature between 170 and 212. Remember, you're in tea rhythm with this, so there's not a hurry. Make sure you get it right. Cups are clean, heated properly.
Let's check that curtain bin too before you put the pretzels in.
Do you guys have any of those little red Spanish peanuts?
We don't, of course.
Do you know anything that would taste similar to it, since I'm not allowed to taste?
Looking around for Spanish
It has to
peanut.
be
Like the red skin on there?
I don't need to have the red skin, but it needs to be soft enough. It's going in a salad.
Say, folks, you're un.
It's okay if I try. Okay, thank you.
Yourself?
Perfect. Thank you very much.
That would be you, Erica. I'm gonna mute you.
Not.
And we're cooling the water down. Not in a hurry, but very steady. And she pours the water that has been cooled and aerated into a kettle so that she can control how she actually pours it. 5 grams goes into the heated cup. Smells to make sure it smells the way she's expecting it to, adds the water, sets the timer, and we're off and running. 3 minutes. Okay. So when you do it, will look something like this. It's beautiful. Half on top, half on the bottom. Primordial Forest. Now, before I talk about the second map, I'm going to talk about another anecdotal story. And, you know, I keep reminding everybody that you're the 99ers or the 1%ers, depending which way you look at it. In other words, you know 99, or you know more than 99% of the rest of the tea drinking public. Last night, I had another demonstration of this because my son came home from Vancouver and he works with sons and daughters, billionaires and Chinese billionaires. And so they give him gifts and they've given him some Cliff Tea gifts. And so he asked me, he's smart. He knows, you know, he's not going to brew. Turn it over to me. So I brewed one of these gifts. He said, you know, there's 5 gifts here, pick one. I picked one, brewed it. And I was trying to figure out how to tell him that on a scale of 1 to 100, this one was about a 78. In other words, not very good. And yet this was sent as a gift, an important gift. So then he had me try a second one. And I brewed that. And that was actually a 92 or a 93. And so it really is important to be able to distinguish what you're tasting and why. The 78, you looked at the leaves and right away they were broken up in a way that's unacceptable for Cliff teas. And the taste was thin. The 92 or the 93, rich, deep, very distinct. The leaves, very whole. So again, with all of these teas, they have their characteristics, and you all know these. Now, let's talk about the map. Let's not talk about it. I'll talk about it in a minute because we're down to 6 seconds. But I am going to talk about it, I'm not going to forget it. All right, Tea Master is separating the tea water from the tea leaves. And we get this beautiful color. And we're going to go ahead and enter the quality arena. So let's go ahead and do that. Not you, me. Yep, this is different. I note the astringency. Yep, an aftertaste. Let me do this again to focus on the aroma and taste itself. Oh my goodness, it is different. It's very different. All right, it's your turn to brew. So get out bag number 3, labeled Primordial Forest. It's got 5 grams in it. Set your timer for 3 minutes. Your water temperature should be 107. You're gonna aerate the water. And then go ahead and brew it, and then enter the quality reading. Making sure, of course, in the beginning, using any temperature of water between 170 and 212, that your glasses are absolutely clean. No foreign flavors. Primordial Forest, by the way, is about, I want to say 7 years old. So it's not 17 or 18, and you'll taste that difference right away. But it does have a taste of a somewhat aged raw black. And remember, this is aged as loose leaf versus Sylvan Symphony, which is, or Newman, which are aged as cakes. And you notice just a steady rhythm, not in a hurry. It always feels almost like you're watching a ballet when the tea master is brewing the tea. Everything seems planned, precise, practiced, flawless. Into the tea kettle.
Shaking.
Shaking, warm the tea leaves up. You notice she takes her time. I mean, yes, the shaking is the shaking, but she doesn't just give a quick shake and then go into pouring the water. She makes sure that there's a certain aroma that's coming off of those leaves, which indicates that a lot of them are absorbing that heat. You put
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay, so I sent you a second map, and there's a reason for that. Before we actually look at that map, let's talk about the reason. Tea from Yunnan, in terms of mountain tea, really became famous in 6 to 8 mountains first. Now you can look at the map. And it would be, you see that there's a river there which runs between those mountains. And it's called the Lancang, Lancang. And that's the Mekong. We know that as the Mekong once it enters Vietnam. And so the tea mountains that are to the north of that are the original tea mountains that were famous. Oh, I got that wrong. It's the tea mountains to the south of that were originally famous. The tea mountains to the north are the more newly famous. The Ailao Mountains aren't listed here because they're farther north and west. And it was more isolated, harder to get to. Does this mean that those trees weren't harvested, that those trees weren't important? No, it simply means that the infrastructure for these areas was better. And so it was easier to advertise and sell and have people come and visit. Ailao Mountains, really, really hard to navigate. Infrastructure is really, really hard. Also, the nature of what lives in those mountains, along with humans, hard to deal with. So that's one of the reasons that those are later famous. And the Yunnan Mountains, which I mentioned at the beginning of the session, those are going to become more and more famous as the infrastructure improves. How long is it going to take the infrastructure to improve? I don't know the exact answer, but it's going to be something on the order of 10 to 20 years because it's a whole mountain range. They have many protected animal species in there, many types of monkeys, few apes, many types of snakes and other animals. You have to be careful. All right, your timer should have gone off. Separate the tea water rhythmically from the tea leaves. And you end up with this color. And what a beautiful color this is. You end up with that aroma of the leaves. Let's enter the quality arena. And so this is 170 degrees. You take a 170-degree sip. Coat your tongue. Get a sense of this. Lot going on in here. And then you're going to take, after you analyze, you're going to take a second sip and analyze the aroma and analyze the taste and verify the astringency and aftertaste. And you're going to think about energetics with this, if any. And don't worry if you don't get it. Many times I find some of these to be delayed energetic city. So in that map where you see the division between the original famous mountains and then the mountains that become famous later, is there any difference in elevation? No, not really. They're all between this 1,500 to 2,000 feet above sea level. That's not correct. Those are meters. So it's about 4,500 to 6,000 feet above sea level. The soil is going to be one of three types of soil, either red soil, red-brown, or brown soil. The pH is going to be approximately the same. It's in a range of 4.0 to 4.9. The precipitation, there are microclimates there. So it's going to be somewhere between 50 to 70 inches annually. This year, by the way, it's drier than normal years. And so tea farmers are not very happy about that. Usually the rainy season starts the second half of April and goes through October on and off. And rains have come quite late this year, so that's not a good thing. I think I mentioned to you that some parts of Yunnan are experiencing a drought and forest fires and all the ugly things that we see in California. So this problem of longevity and sustainability and access to great tea is one that's at the top of our heads. And this isn't something we can control in the normal way we try and control things. Our greatest control is to go out and continue making purchases. That's our greatest control. Building our infrastructure, our tea infrastructure, until such time as it's not available anymore. Which case we'll have and we'll be able to supply you for some period of time. And that's really the strategy that we've thought through. And, you know, I'm embarrassed every year. So I might as well get this embarrassment out here in September, because every year I tell everybody, and this year in particular, I told you up front, very early this year, because I thought, well, if I say it in January, then it will really be true. And so in January, I said, we're going to buy fewer teas this year. And I kept repeating. And even in February, I don't think we're going to buy teas this year. Turns out I am just addicted to lying. So, of course, we're buying teas. And of course, the only thing that we're doing differently, and this is important for you to understand, if you like stuff here, you should buy it sooner, because the one thing we have done is cut down on the amount greatly. So instead of tens of pounds, which is usually what we do, we're getting up to 10 pounds, 5, 6, 7, 8 pounds, and that's it. So we're still buying, and we're buying widely, because we want to continue to have access to these teas. And by continuing to have our hand in the game, we're going to continue to have access until there is no more access. And so that's the reason we're so focused on continuing to buy, even though I tell you every year we're not going to buy. I think as a fresh start this next year, I'm not going to say we're not going to buy. In fact, I think in January, the tune is going to be this: we're going to buy more than ever. And then that way, I'll be sure to be telling the truth. I hate it when this stuff doesn't come the way I think it's going to go. All right, your turn to tell me what you're thinking about the teas. And make sure you get out your notes from Cascade and Newman to compare. Yes.
Rob shares, the scent of the tea water is brown with a hint of cider. It feels light on the tongue. It's immediately astringent and round with a hint of nuttiness.
Round, light on the tongue, immediate astringency, hint of cider, and a hint of nuttiness. This is Rob's impression right off the get-go. And I like this because when we first got Primordial Forest, by the way, I've always loved Primordial Forest. It's been one of my favorites. And one of the reasons I loved it in the beginning was its forwardness. It was very forward compared to the other loose leaf raw blacks we have. But it's developed this layered approach that Rob was able to capture in that description. Cider, nuttiness, but most especially roundness. There is definitely the roundness. This is a comfortable tea to serve and a really comfortable tea to drink. Yes.
Peter shares, it's nice, smooth, soft viscosity.
Nice, smooth, soft, and what?
Soft and with a soft viscosity.
Oh, with soft viscosity. Love especially the ending there, a soft viscosity. So there's depth to this thing, but it's not, you have to cut through that depth. It's subtle depth. there definitely is. Great catch on that, Peter.
Your ads, I feel a lightness to the energetics and a lot of energetics as compared to something that solidly grounds like Jeannie's lamp.
Oh, this is a interesting and great comparison. So energetics are there. Peter has identified them, but they're light. And it's not that grounding. And he compared it to Jeannie's lamp, which is a huge cliff tea, which is grounding. And I like this comparison. And I would say it's not grounding like Newman either. It's again, the lighter energetics, the lighter feel of movement through you by the tea. Great catch. Yeah.
Jen shares, I agree with the description of soft entirely. Also a soft umami presence as well.
Great catch on this. Jen identifies not only soft energetics, but softness and round and a slight hint of umami. And there is umami in this, but it doesn't overwhelm. And so part of Jen's comment really is a reflection of balance. There is balance in this tea between the flavors. One isn't overwhelming the other. As you drink down into it, it's all coming alive. Great catch. All right. I love Primordial Forest. And as I mentioned before, always have, but it is very different from Cascade. It's very different. It's very different from Newman. And it's its own beast, so to speak. And I like that balance of flavors. That's probably what appeals to me more than any other part of Primordial Forest. This was a truly fun set to do with all of you. And particularly since all of you are so plugged in terms of making distinctions between the teas and to have 3 raw blacks like this, because I know that raw blacks, and it was the same was true for me. In the beginning, raw blacks were the hardest of all the teas for me to really get my arms around. And I had a lot of difficulty with that at the beginning, but over time now, I've become really, really comfortable, and they are a part of my quiver, so to speak, in terms of great teas here at the shop. Yes.
Some final comments wafting in on energetics. Kate feels warming. Jen feels an overall sense of comfort with this tea. And Rob can feel himself evolving from this tea.
Oh, that's interesting. 3 energetics comments, 1 warming from Kate. I like that. Actually ends up eventually becoming warming for me. It takes a bit for that to manifest itself, but at the end, yes, warming. Jen has comforting. And I love that sense of comforting, suggesting, almost like we're getting in the fall. It's, you need a little blanket and it just feels like a great tea to drink. Yes, I catch that comforting. And then Rob has evolving. And I love this also because really what he's saying is that, okay, you taste and at the beginning, it's one thing. And as you go down, like so many of the teas here, you get layers. And as you go down the layered steps, you get different feelings. And you do. You not only get the different feelings, but you yourself start to appreciate the tea differently. And I take this evolving as that Rob is understanding raw blacks in a way that he didn't before. And this was the great thing about having a trio, especially like this, because these three are evocative in different ways. I salute all of you. You've come and done the hardest of the teas because they're subtlest. And you've done a great job with these in terms of evaluations. The next set is going to be wildly different than the last few months because it's going to be 3 different styles. We're going to start off with a cliff tea, spring surprise. We're going to do something second, which I can't remember. And then we're going to do unconditional third, which is a green tea. That's ridiculous. I can't remember, but I have it right here. Oh, yes. We're going to do ovation second. Why couldn't I remember ovation? Ovation is a wonderful, unique red tea that's got an orchid in it. All right. Your responsibilities this week are to stay healthy. And I look forward to seeing everyone next week. Bye-bye now.
Take care.